Hello and welcome to I Can Relate. I'm Jessica Burns. This podcast takes us on people's journeys through personal and sometimes sensitive experiences. These are usually topics that are not spoken about, and the hope here is that by bringing them to light, it'll help others feel less alone in what they're going through. I look forward to embarking on this journey with you as we develop a greater understanding and empathy for one another. Today I sit down with Erin. She lives in New York City with her husband Mike and new baby daughter Addie. She shares her fertility journey and how her first pregnancy ended up in a miscarriage. This podcast episode may be triggering for some, so please do take care. Hi Erin, how are you doing?
Doing well. Thanks for having me, Jeff.
Thank you so much for coming on today. This is such a huge deal, and I'm really honored to have you with me and share this space with you. If you're comfortable, will you share your fertility journey with us?
Absolutely. So, first of all, I think it's really important that you're doing this podcast, Jess. And I think when we think about topics that people need to connect more on and need to talk more about, I definitely think fertility and miscarriage and pregnancy loss are definitely in that group. My fertility journey began a couple years back, and I found out I was pregnant a couple summers ago, and was super excited and just thrilled. And my husband and I had been married for a while, but we had just taken the leap, and we were thrilled. We were over the moon when we found out, and based on kind of what everyone had told us, we were told not to tell anyone, and that was something we knew, so we kept the news to ourselves. So really, I only shared the news early on with my doctor, obviously, my yoga instructor, and my dental hygienist. Those are the people who needed to know in those first few weeks.
I love the dental hygienist. I would not know that.
Yeah, well, because of x-rays.
Okay.
When they go to do those big teeth x-rays, you need to
Yeah.
tell them because you can't be exposed. And so obviously she was like, congrats. But it's funny, the people in your network that
Yeah.
need to know.
Yeah.
So we kept it, to ourselves. And then at around 8 weeks, I had a miscarriage, and I know we're going to dig more into that, but that was something that we had to get through. And then, in the scope of my larger fertility journey, took a little bit of time, took a few months to feel like myself again and get healthy mentally, physically, get stronger again, before taking the leap back in and trying. And then a couple months later, found out I was pregnant for the second time with our daughter Adelaide, and it's been amazing. So Addie's now, she's 7 months, almost 8 months now, and it's just been such a wild ride and incredible. So that's a very short synopsis, I think, of the journey.
If you don't mind me asking these questions,
Yeah.
how did you know you were having a miscarriage?
Yeah. So for me, my miscarriage started naturally. I started spotting. I was actually in a meeting at work. I didn't feel so good. Went to the ladies' room and discovered that I was spotting, and didn't know what to do, went back into the meeting kind of in shock.
Yeah.
And then, just really didn't know what to think. And I really do think it was shock. Went through the motions, and the second I could, got back to my office, shut the door, called my doctor, called my husband. And at that point, it was pretty late in the evening, and my doctor was like, listen, we could have you, go to a hospital right now, but you're going to spend the whole night in the ER. And she said that, she's like, in the event that it is a miscarriage, there's very little that can be done. She's like, go home, rest, get a good night's sleep, come in the morning, and we'll figure it out. And obviously I was worried, but there's a lot of reasons for spotting early in pregnancy. So just because you are spotting definitely does not mean you're having a miscarriage, but it's one of the symptoms. So I was super upset. I did not rest or get a good night's sleep. I will tell you that much. Not for lack of trying. And then the next morning, I was a mess. I took the train into the city with my husband, and I was just very emotional. I remember sitting in one of the train stations trying to pull it together, and was just so grateful to have him by my side, because it's a rough thing to get alone. And then from there, we went to the doctor's office and she confirmed it. And then one of the things that happens is you have options in terms of how you want to proceed. And that's something I hadn't thought of until that point.
And what kind of options are those?
Yeah, so for me, I was around 8 weeks, so I could end, and my miscarriage began naturally. So I had the option to wait and see if it would progress on its own. There's another option to take medication to speed it up. And then there was another option to do a D&C procedure, which essentially is to go in and to remove the tissue. And depending on where someone is and how far along they are, there may be more or fewer options. But for me, those were the three that were offered. And it's something that I really had never thought of. I knew very little about miscarriage before this happened. And so I went home thinking, I guess I'll let it progress naturally. And about 12 hours into that, just really needed it to be over. And so I made the choice to call my doctor and get the prescription filled to move things along. And I don't even know if it did move things along or not, but it meant that after a few days, I was able to kind of complete the miscarriage and to kind of start recovering myself.
Wow. Well, I'm assuming this has been quite a mental toll for you. Was it also a mental toll for your husband, Mike?
It was, and I think if there's not a lot of support for women going through this, there's even less support, I think, for the men who are by their side and also experiencing that loss. So, so it was. And I think one of the things that we realized too was because we had kept such a small circle of people around us who knew. I mean, as I mentioned before, it's kind of laughable. It was like my yoga instructor, my dental hygienist. It meant that when we had to reach out to people to tell them what had happened, we had to start from the beginning, and it made it even harder, and it became a bit of a barrier to getting support. So we were able to reach out to family pretty quickly, but it meant that in that same phone call that we were telling them bad news, we're saying, we were pregnant and now we're not. And in hindsight, I think I definitely would have brought in, and in my second pregnancy brought in people who I love and care about and know would want to be there as part of my support network, no matter what happens. And so, just getting that support. It took us a little bit to talk to friends and things like that, just because it is pretty draining to have to share all of that with people when you're already, in a pretty vulnerable spot.
I think that's really good for listeners out there to know, if you are thinking about having a baby, as Erin was saying, it might be something you need to think about is who are your main support system if this goes south, because 1 in 8 pregnancies unfortunately do end in miscarriage. And correct me if I'm wrong, Erin, there's nothing you can do to stop the miscarriage from happening. I'm not entirely sure what brings them on, but I don't believe it's because of stress. Do you know, Erin, what causes a miscarriage?
Yeah, so this is interesting. There's information out there, and I'll share with you what I know, but I also think, just my personal opinion is, I wish there was more information out there. I wish that we had more research on this, and I'm hopeful that with more and more women becoming physicians and scientists and medical doctors, that there will become more information on this. So I think my understanding is that in most cases, a miscarriage is caused because the fetus isn't developing normally. So that could be anything from abnormal genes or some sort of chromosomal mismatch. And that it really isn't on average, it's not normally an issue with anything the mother has done or the mother's body that's carrying the baby. In a very few cases, there could be health conditions or trauma that occur to the mom that I think could probably cause it. But again, I'm not a doctor. I'm just telling you how I've understood it. But more likely than not, as it was in my case, you're just not going to know why. And that's really hard to wrap your head around. And I think you're right, Jess, like there's this general understanding, I think, out there, idea that people have that, oh, the mom drank too much caffeine or was too stressed or was on her feet too much or shouldn't have been running or there. And I don't know where that kind of narrative has come from or if that's an old narrative that's not really based in science. But of course, I beat myself up and second guessed everything I had done in the week or two leading up to it. From, drinking caffeine to being stressed at work. And the reality is, more often than not, these are not things that the mom has any control over. And I think it's important to know, I would recommend, have you heard of Emily Oyster? She's an economist who writes about pregnancy and parenting.
No, I haven't.
She's wonderful, and she wrote a book called Expecting Better, and she looks at studies, like what does the actual data out there indicate, and she's looked at things like caffeine in pregnancy and stress in pregnancy, and she basically pulls out, here's what the data says, I'm not going to interpret it for you, make your own judgment, and really helps debunk a lot of the common things that I think we all assumed based on maybe one experiment from 50 years ago that really didn't isolate the factor that they thought they were. For example, alcohol in pregnancy. There's really not that much data out there. And so she's someone that I would look to and I would recommend for anyone who's embarking on this journey to read some of her stuff. She's pretty great.
I'll make sure it's put in the notes there for the listeners. Did you reach a point where, it sounds like you've come full circle, but where you finally realized this actually, this was not in my control, this isn't my fault? And have you had a chance to release that guilt that you said you were experiencing?
Yes, it takes a little bit. You're just so vulnerable. I felt so vulnerable and raw afterwards and just kind of just empty. It was a pretty rough spot to be in. And I think definitely looking inward, and of course there was guilt, then came more research, then came thinking a little critically, and through digging into it, realizing that hold on, this is extremely common. This was not caused by anything it did. And one other important note is that having one miscarriage does not at all put you at risk for having another. It doesn't increase your risk for a second one. Having multiple miscarriages can increase your risk for another one, but just having one does not. And that's something I think that's really important to note. And yeah, of course I second guessed stuff in the beginning. And also it took me at least, and I think it's probably pretty common for this to happen. You just kind of was in a dark place for a little while after, because you're pregnant and you have all these amazing hormones that are keeping you, happy and going. And similar to what happens in the postpartum period when you brought a baby to full term, you've got a drop in hormones and things happen. And it can be hard to get through that period. And one of the things for me that was really helpful was taking a beat, not feeling any pressure to try again. At one point, a doctor said to me, "Oh, I'm sure you'll be pregnant the next time I see you." And I was like, whoa, I'm not ready for that. I need to take some time for myself and relearning to just nourish my body for me, eating healthy. I ran a half marathon, took a beat. I told my husband that's what I need to do. And he's like, fine, I'm running it with you. And he ran his first half marathon too. And a half marathon's a nice, fun distance, and it was a great way to channel some energy into just feeling healthy and feeling like myself again and feeling just worthy of doing that just for myself.
Did you feel like you found a community of women online, or do you feel that's really lacking?
Yeah, so there's definitely communities of women. There's a lot online, and if anyone is going through this or just careful about what you're reading. There's a lot of sources out there that you just don't know who's posting what, sometimes online, and you can just scare yourself unnecessarily. But I will tell you, Jess, I would say, like, once you're in this terrible miscarriage club, like, you realize how big it is. So I had known one person, a good friend of mine, who had been through this before, and she was incredibly helpful to me when I went through it, and was kind of giving me pretty much live, like, technical assistance over the course of a few days on this roller coaster of emotion I was on, and just being so supportive. And I really didn't share in a broad way at all anything about my miscarriage for a while. But when I did start opening up to friends and talking about it, that community kind of found me. So it is so common that as soon as I started talking to people, like, the number of people who've reached out to me over the last, like, year and a half who've needed that same kind of support because they were going through it has just really, it's been incredible. And those are friendships that will last for life. And some of the folks have also gone on and, you know, have a little baby that's keeping them up at night right now too. So it's been incredibly helpful to be on this journey with so many other women. And you know, no one has to open up and tell their story about miscarriage unless they're ready to and want to. But I will say, for me, once I did, it helped a lot. And I think it's also helping some other women who are experiencing it now, or experienced it after me. And I'm sure they'll help others behind them too.
I really hope by speaking openly, we're going to help someone else out there who isn't comfortable doing that and can just play an episode and realize that they're not alone in what they're going through, and it's absolutely not your fault. Is this why you think people need to be open in general about things relating to pregnancy and fertility?
Yeah, we as a society need to welcome women to share that, and for men to step up as allies as well there, so that people feel more comfortable and don't fear the judgment of coming out with something like this. So 100% think we need to share more. And I would say, you know, we're talking just about miscarriage today, but in the scope of kind of pregnancy losses, there's everything from, like, ectopic pregnancies that can happen earlier on, chemical pregnancies, through stillbirths and the loss of an infant. You really need that support. So I think even just more broadly than miscarriage, the more we can support women and support moms and dads who are becoming parents, and encourage them to talk and to share and support them, the better.
Yeah, and I think work and the workplace, they've done a good job. It may be in the UK, and you could speak differently for the US, with parental leave, but
Yeah.
I'm not sure what the support's like for someone going through a miscarriage. Are you allowed to take time off, and do you have to disclose why?
It's a really good question. I'm actually not sure. My hunch would be that you could take medical leave. I can tell you, I pretended I was having a stomach virus and took time as though it was sick time. I have friends who were very open and honest with work, and that worked for them. So I'm not sure if there's any special time off, but you absolutely can and should use sick time, if nothing else. And that said, I had another friend who decided she wanted to work through those days following, and she would rather stay busy, and there's no wrong way to get through it. So if that is something that, you know, works best for you, and no judgment there at all.
Do you think there's something that companies could do ahead of time to show that they're supportive of women going through this? And would that have helped you feel more comfortable?
I kind of just didn't want to talk about it. Yeah, I think it was more that. And also, I will say, as a woman, mid-career woman looking to grow, there was the concern that if I told people I was trying, even after the miscarriage, they would then now be looking for when I was pregnant again and thinking about when I take time off, and maybe even get passed over for promotions or other opportunities. That honestly was a piece too. And that is, for me, that was a very real concern, was also making sure not to share information that would negatively impact my career was how it was perceived by me. Whether that was real or not, it was my perception.
And your perception is your reality. Do you think if you were to get pregnant again, do you think you'd feel more in the swing of it? Or if you've had a miscarriage once, do you think you'll always have that fear?
I don't know. I think once you've experienced loss, in some way the fear may stay with you. For me, I feel like that when you have a loss, it's trauma, and I'll carry some of that fear, I'm sure, forward. What is different, I think, is some confidence in what I've been able to do and getting through this roller coaster ride and being on it and knowing that one foot in front of the other. It's not a linear process. Like, it's not always a fertility journey is not always 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Sometimes there's a few steps back, and that's part of the journey. And so that understanding, I think, will be helpful in the future. And I also think, having been through it, I do have a larger network now. I've got a community of moms and friends who are on this journey, and that helps a lot.
Would you like to give the listeners any advice for women who are going through a miscarriage now, have been through one, and men supporting their partners going through one?
I would definitely say, if you are feeling any guilt or shame, and that you're struggling to reach out to your people, your friends and family, or your community, I would encourage you to try and do some of that outreach, because for me, that made a big difference. And just know that you are worthy, whether you are pregnant or not pregnant, or struggling through something, knowing that you and your body are worthy of nourishment and health and care, and just take care of yourself. Don't feel pressure to move forward at all in any direction, and just know that you are worthy of that, and take your time and take care.
Your bravery stepping forward with like your experience is going to help others feel a little bit better about theirs. And I hope that's what we've achieved today. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Jess.
You've been listening to I Can Relate. If you'd like to hear more of these episodes, please subscribe, rate, and review this podcast. You can do this on Apple Podcast, Spotify, or any other platform you're listening on. To become a part of the community, follow us on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, and LinkedIn. Join me next time for another episode. Thanks for listening.